Hello! In this 15-minute video, you will learn how to properly. The video will be split into 6 sections above, with section 4 being a little bit more in-depth and data-heavy for more data-driven players. But with that said, let's go! With the FiGHteR and Tech Arks expansion, FiGHteR is now way much better overall. Here's some quick comparison. Take one hit and lose your 20% damage boost? Gone, thanks to the reduced damage taken during overload changes. Boring gameplay of just using 2 strongest PA back and forth? Gone, thanks to new FiGHteR skills that encourage you to use as many different PA as possible. Mid DPS? Gone, thanks to down changes and potency increase for everything. In summary, strong and even stronger with enemy that go down a lot like Drivers or Solus. Oh yeah, and then why DS Nux multi-web? Because DS is just overall highest DPS in long bossing scenarios, and Nux has the strongest counter in FiGHteR arsenal. With this said, let's get to the core skills sections, abilities that you will need to understand to play the class correctly. Overload. Increase your damage dealt and taken for a set time. With Overload short cycle, the values are as below. You can tweak this around based on the content you're doing. Generally, you want to max out Overload short cycles because after PP reservation gives you 15 seconds of reduced PP usage when Overload ends. More overloads mean more after PP reservations, means more time for you to spam your skills. FiGHteR Arts Pursuits give you a gauge that charges fast when you use PA you haven't used yet, or slow with PAs you already use. Once full, your next PA does an AoE explosions, 20-second cooldown. This is what makes FiGHteR much more challenging and fun to play now, since you're expected to use as much as your kit as possible and plan ahead. FiGHteR Skip Arts. Inputting directional inputs and PA button let you do both first half then second half of PA. Inputting PA button only let you skip and do second half of PA only. Another art, skip attack. One PA into another PA would allow you connect to normal to start from normal 4. Nux sidestep counter alternation. Change your sidestep counter to a stronger sidestep counter that zoom you to your target. Nux attack N5 alternation. Your N5 can now be a strong AoE slam down if no directional input at N5. Nux attack switch. After successful counter sway, you have an enhanced N5 charge that you can use whenever you want. This enhances your next normal N5 or alternate N5 to do more damage. Last but not least, Whirlwind. Deal damage to nearby enemy every 1 second. You can start level 1 Whirlwind by doing any DSPA or Saber another counter, and you don't need to hit anything to trigger Whirlwind 1. It goes up to 3 level depending on your win accumulation. You get win by doing double saber stuff. At least 30% of double saber damage output is this. If you don't accumulate at least 15 win value in the last 15 seconds, then your whirlwind will disappear. This just means you need to hit something with a DSPA every 15 seconds to keep it up, pretty much. Here is the skill tree with core skills covered. Let's move on to the next section. 1000 blows. Grab T2 because T1 is for mopping. T2 is the DPS increase on down, and T3 is only for min-maxing in very rare scenarios. Make sure to level 10 T2 so it's not a detriment outside of downs. A double drive. Grab T3. T1 is good if you solo Nux, but T3 is so fucking nice as a gap closer. I'll do some comparison between this and Julian 1 later. Julian. Grab T1 because speed is super comfy and good generally, especially with Pursuit in place now. T2 Julian no point because Julian T1 and thousands of blows T2 exists. T3 is for Giga Brain chats. Quick Gash. Again, grab T2 because speed is super comfy and good generally, especially with Pursuit. T1 is for mopping, and T3 is again for Giga Brain min-max chats, but it is the highest BPS if you want to do that. So I'm not going to touch the T3 for Julian and Quick Gash. But depending on the TA you grab, your game plan and DPS value will be significantly different. This guy will follow the one I suggested above. Now let's get to the chunkiest part of the video. DPS scales with your gear, so we're just going to use generalized power per second. If you see PA name 1 or PA name 2, it means the first half or the second half. All power values are with Whirlwind 3 in mind, so you will see Nux PA have a plus 20 power per second, compared to the data you see in the NGS verification data storage sheet. Since whirlwind tick every second, it's hard to calculate them into the power per second data, so the data you see might be skewed, but should be a good estimate for the most part. Backhand strike, guard counter with a whopping 896 power per second on a perfect backhand strike, and minimum 620 to 795 power per second on a normal backhand strike. More time in evasion frames means less DPS. You will hear a blink guard sound on a perfect counter. Here's the comparison. To pull off perfect counter, the enemy must hit your evade frames within 0.1 second. Very high DPS, ridiculously high 40 PP, fast frames. Use this if the window to the next boss attack is small. Also, perfect backhand strike and normal backhand strike charge the pursuit gauge separately. Thousands Blows 2, T2, 467 power per second on non-down and 512 power per second on down enemy. This is DS Nux's second strongest PA. Iframes starting on hit is highest DPS, half iframes, but high 34 PP, long frames, and move you upwards. Useful on downs, big opening windows, or when you want to move upward. Julian Dance 2 T1, 462 power per second at 48 win per second. Last hit is the strong hit and counts toward pursuit charge. If you cannot hit the last hit, it's not worth it. High DPS, high win, mid 21 PP, but very long frames. Use it if you have a big enough window where you can squeeze it in. Unchained Circle 2, 462 power per second and 26 win per second. Have Omni Guard frames, high DPS, big AoE, fast frames but very low win, and high 30 PP. Use it during super small attack windows. The more enemy you hit, the more win it generates. Sky Climb 2, 454 power per second at 32 win per second. Move you downward and have front guard frames. Low 17 PP but mid DPS, mid win, fast frames, and half guard frames. Use when you cannot fit a Julian 2, or when you're echoing PP, or when you're trying to build win and want to move slightly downward. Sky Climb 1, 452 power per second, 30 win per second, move you upward, low 17 PP but mid DPS, mid win, fast frames. Use when you're echoing PP, when you're trying to build win, or when you want to move slightly upward. Swift Rush 1, 450 power per second, can move you downward per latest fighter changes, mid 23 PP, mid DPS but fast frames, longer reach, and you can cancel directly to weapon action anytime. Great filler to reduce inactive frames, used to reposition or fill up with 1000 Blow 2 since 1000 Blow 2 moves you upward and Swift Rush 1 would then move you downward. The Double Drive 2 T3, 449 power per second, front guard frames, high 28 PP with guard frames but mid frames, mid DPS. Rarely used in this multi-weapon setup but can be used to fall off Swift Rush and build pursuit gauge. Quick Gash 1 T2, 449 power per second at 39 win per second, iframes and front guard frames, mid 21 PP guard frames, mid DPS but high win, used to build win and pursuit gauge. Quick Gash 2 T2, 448 power per second at 53 win per second. Front guard frames and then iframes. The jump back deals immediate damage. Mid 21 PP guard frame and iframes. Very high win and fast frames, but mid DPS. Used to build pursuit gauge, build win, backstep short distance, or you have a very small tiny damage window. These PAs that I just went through are your main single damage dealing, win building, and pursuit gauge charging PA. Now we get into the utility ones. Swift Rush 2, 448 power per second, guard frames jump you backwards, mid 23 PP, mid DPS, mid frames, and guard frames. Use only if you need to backstep far away, very rarely use. 1000 Blow 1 T2, 439 power per second on non-down and 481 powers per second on down enemy. Low DPS on non-down, high 34 PP, but long and constantly active frames. No reason to use on down when TB2 into Swift Rush 1 is higher DPS overall. Use when you want to take a quick mental break and not mold about inactive frames. This is also the only PA you can jump out of to connect to a backhand strike. Julian 1 T1, 438 power per second at 38 win per second. Your main gap closer but very janky as it usually stops short from target due to weird hitbox calculation. Use only when you're trying to gap close from far away. Unchained Circle 1, 429 power per second at 19 win per second. 93% of the time you're in guard frames. Very comfy mopping and win building tool when there is a large crowd of enemy. Used when you want to do AoE but echoing PP or when there's too much shit on the screen. Otherwise just spam Unchained 2. Double Drive 1, T3, 424 power per second. Used when you're trying to reposition mid to long distance or against boss with multiple parts that may fuck up Julian 1. That's all for PAs. Now we get to the different counters. Saber Step Counter, 629 power per second at 34 win per second evasion type counter. More like 485 power per second due to win ticking. Typical fast side step counter frames used when you're trying to generate win or when Nook's step counter display you too much to catch the next counter. Saber Parry another counter, 617 power per second and 10 win per second guard counter. Mid frames, use this to go from Whirlwind 0 to Whirlwind 1 or while you're at Whirlwind 3 and cannot backhand strike because you're out of PP. Knuckles alternate step counter, 607 power per second evasion type counter. Fast frames better than normal Nook step counter and zoom you to your target. Use this as your main step counter. Sway counter into counter plus into N5. Roughly 490 to 607 power per second. More time in evade frames means lower DPS. Weapon action twice to do counter and counter plus. If you have the time, use direction on N5, if not, use alternate N5. You pretty much live in I frame, guard frame because of this. Use this instead of backhand strike when the time to the next attack is big. Saber Parry counter. Shit power per second, but it's tons of win at 60 win per second. Use this while you're building up to Whirlwind 3. That's all for counters. Let's move on to the special skills. Double Saber Photon Blast allow you to control where to go and bring you from Whirlwind 0 to Whirlwind 3 if all attack hits. Last hit is the strongest and most win hit. Spiral Drive, 707 power per second by itself, but you need to hold normal attack to trigger it, so you usually transition from N1 to Spiral or N4 to Spiral, so it's actually more like 600 power per second. Usable only when you have Whirlwind 2 or Whirlwind 3. You go down one Whirlwind level when you use it. Spiral also gives you a unique 1.3 times wind gen buff for the next 35 seconds. DPS is indifferent regardless of whether you're in Whirlwind 3 or Whirlwind 2. Deadly Archer, 540 power per second roughly. You need to hold weapon action to trigger it. Usable only if you have Whirlwind 2 or Whirlwind 3, and it consumes all of your Whirlwind when you use it, and it gives you a unique 1.7 times wind generation buff for the next 30 seconds. DPS is indifferent regardless of whether you're in Whirlwind 3 or Whirlwind 2. Fighter Arts Pursuits, it's a 700 power AoE. If you manage to trigger it every time it's off, it's 20-second cooldown. You can think of it as a passive 33 power per second. And that's it. Let's move on to the next section. So I just gave you a tons of PA and frames. What did you do with them? Let's get into the game plan. During start of fight, you want to build Whirlwind 3 as fast as possible while trying to trigger Pursuit. In short, use all your DSPA and parry counter whenever you can. Note that Whirlwind 3 and Whirlwind 2 deals the same damage per tick when you have Knuckles out, so you just need to build to Whirlwind 2 for heavy counter fight, like Chimkin, Bujin, or even Dalian. During the fight, use your backhand strike and knuckle weapon action as much as possible on counter windows. If the boss does not hit you, then you just cycle through the top damage PAs into N5 to get PP and trigger your Pursuit. Make sure to use at least one DSPA every 13 seconds so Whirlwind doesn't disappear. Not having Whirlwind 3 is a DPS loss, so you usually don't want to use Spiral Drive or Deadly Archer in general, and optimizing rotation with Spiral Drive in mind is a huge headache for not much gain. Mopping is the only scenario that I would suggest using these skills frequently because you can get back Whirlwind 3 really fast. General Photon Blast combos, since Photon Blast regen all your Whirlwind, you want to do Overload Spiral Drive into Deadly Archer into Photon Blast. For Break, it's pretty much the same combo, but you add another Spiral Drive and Deadly Archer, then spam TB2 after. Boss downs, TB2 spams if big boss, or TB2 into Swift Rush 1 if small boss. Very simple. If the boss fly away and you can't hit the boss to upkeep Whirlwind, then use Spiral Drive sometime during downtime to get Wind Region buff. And that's it! You are now well equipped to be the very best DS Nux user. Let's go on to the Dagger section, shall we?
The data in this video is reviewed and approved by other data nerds and Phi mains such as Amogus, Kristen Stewart, Noctis from PGR, and Kagome. Thanks for checking my shit. I appreciation.